Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what can we say about the Super Saturday primary and caucuses results that occurred yesterday? It's one step closer towards reaching that inevitable goal of selecting the nominee for the respective political parties. I'm going to particularly focus here on the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, primaries that resulted last night. There were 4 states up at stake, and what was interesting is we learned once again that the graduates from Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media got some of the things wrong again. It's a similar pattern as to what we saw in the days leading up to Super Tuesday. Just as in Super Tuesday, they claimed that Donaldus, Julius Caesar Trumpus, that New York billionaire businessman and real estate mogul, would have a clean slate or a clean sweep of the entire process. It's just that isn't what came to fruition. Once again, Texas Senator Ted Cruz performed much better than people thought. In fact, what's interesting is each of the frontrunners, Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus and Ted Cruz, won 2 of the 4 states that were up for grabs during this contest. But as we all know, the most important measuring stick here in this entire contest is the number of delegates awarded as opposed to the number of states won. So yes, it may appear on the surface that winning as many states as possible is the great and grandiose thing. It may get a lot of fanfare from the salivating mainstream media, but at the end of it, if you win more states but less delegates, you still do not actually win the contest. And that's something that can be a bit of a disconnect for the people. But that being said, it is absolutely crucial to note here that Ted Cruz took home more delegates than Donald Trump did last night. So therefore, you could clearly state that in the contest of last evening, Ted Cruz came out as a solid winner because he outperformed expectations and he outperformed the presumptive nominee. Because whenever you look at what the salivating mainstream media has been saying up until this point, it's always been that Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, at least for the past several months, is a shoo-in. He is unstoppable. The Trump train is this unstoppable force that no one can get in between Trump and the inevitable nomination. But I don't see it that way. I see that Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus is suffering from his foot and mouth disease that he has suffered from since the start of this election cycle. He has been a bit of a gaffe machine, and while he may have been the Teflon Don in the preceding months, some of the actual developments that have been working against him are starting to stick. This whole notion of the unofficial endorsement by David Duke, who is the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, is absolutely hurting him. I don't care what a lot of the conservative pundits are saying with respect to that. That is something that should be sending out red flags for every decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizen. And the reason that I say that is this is a new era in the United States. The only thing that should be of importance to us is the United States Constitution. But with respect to Donald Trump, he doesn't even pay lip service to the Constitution. He avoids it like the plague, and then he has these controversial endorsements and relationships with those who have a rather checkered past. And that is just going to give fodder and ammunition to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to lambast him in the general election. And folks, you know that they're holding back their punches now. And I do have to hand it to Texas Senator Ted Cruz for standing up to the media on that. And in particular, I'm speaking of Fox News, who has been very light with respect to their attacks on Donald Trump as of late. You could even say that Fox News is a bit in the bag for the Donaldus. Certainly, they have hosts that seem to be in the bag for him. Look at a majority of the hosts on The Five. We know that Eric Bolling has come out recently and stated that it's a breath of fresh air in the political process for a candidate to basically speak out of both sides of his mouth. You know, it's this sort of intellectually disingenuous drivel that absolutely disenfranchises the American electorate. It makes them think that the entire system is corrupt, and therefore they adopt this view that maybe we need to blow the whole thing up. And while I can understand that sentiment, I really think that that is more of a reactionary thing to the sort of divisive politics that we've seen as a result of these 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. He has absolutely pitted American against American, and this tactic of divide and conquer has made tensions in this country reach fever pitch. And if there is one thing that can be said about Donald Trump's entry into the race, it's that he has been a divisive figure from the start. He has been basically purposefully and intentionally going in to divide the base of the gutless opposition party so that it either propels him into the nomination so that he can amass power for himself, because let's face it, folks, Donald Trump has always been about himself. He's not someone who does things because it's going to benefit anyone else. There's always that ulterior motive of benefiting himself. He's done that all of his adult life. In fact, that's one of the key tenets of his book, The Art of the Deal. And so I see no reason for him to have changed. He has given no inkling as to having a desire to change or having a desire to do a greater good thing. I haven't seen any indica that he is changed. That he has changed, that there has been this deep change in his heart towards becoming this great benevolent type figure. I still see him as being the same Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus that he has been for decades. But there's something to be said about all of this. There is this type of intellectual disingenuousness on the part of the salivating mainstream media. And yes, this time around I am going to lump Fox News into that. We saw last night, as the results were finalized, Judge Jeanine, with Judge Jeanine, come out and basically lambast anyone who was refusing to support Donald Trump, saying that they were betraying the party, that they were standing against the party. You know, Judge Jeanine, there's something that I hold over party allegiance, and that is the allegiance to the United States Constitution. That is something that each and every American citizen is called to support and swear allegiance to. Particularly you, who, as a judge and a lawyer, would have taken the oath of office both at the time that you entered into the bar and then at the time that you became a judge. So there's something to be said about your blind loyalty to Donald Trump that seems to speak out against what is wrong with this country. Because really what it is you're showing a conflict of interest. You're showing that you are more akin or more loyal to a cult of personality than to the law of the land. And if you stop and think about it, the old adage goes that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, that means that equal protection under the law applies to us all. all. The law is meant to apply to all American citizens equally, irrespective of their status or their position within the country. This is just something that is, an outcropping of our natural law tenets, the very natural law tenets that underpin our entire representative Republican system of government. And you see that what Barack Hussein Obama has managed to accomplish in his 2 terms of office is to have people come out entirely against our constitutional system. They think that it's a broken system or an antiquated system. They're so caught up in their raw emotionalism that they're blinded to the fact that the system really is something that is a contractual relationship, and that the power squarely rests in the hands of the popular sovereigns, we the people. After all, that's why the preamble to the Constitution starts off with the lines, "We the people of the United States of America." That is absolutely quintessential in understanding what the entire outlook for this country was from its inception, dating back some 230 years ago or more. And that is that we, the people, are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country. We wield the greatest amount of power. We are the ones that ultimately are the boss, for lack of a better term. Really what that says is that we have control over politics. And therefore, to see the way that American polity has devolved into this senseless sort of soap opera is most tragic, because it suggests that the anger has reached to a point in this country that we've turned off our mental faculties, that we've turned off our ability to reason. Reason seems to have been thrown by the wayside as we prepare to attack each other. And it goes to a greater problem that I've seen with respect to the candidacy of Donald Trump. You know, during the Flint debate, one of the things that Donald mentioned was that he hadn't even yet begun to attack Hillary Clinton, and that he is the candidate she most fears to run against. Well, only part of that statement is true. Yes, he hasn't really done anything to attack her. He has gone just all out against his Republican opponents, and I do have a problem with that. It is damaging the image of conservatism. It is damaging our chances to win ultimately, and it is driving a wedge between the base of the party in a form of divide and conquer that is really frightening. But it must be noted that there has been a truly interesting shift of power here, or at least a shift in perception. Donaldus Julius Caesar Trump, as you recall, ever since he first officially threw his hat in the ring, had been polling high. He had high results. He was a popular candidate. But you've noticed that Texas Senator Ted Cruz started at the bottom of the pack. The graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media did all they could to try and destroy his candidacy from the get-go, and he has just been skyrocketing in support. He is closing the gap between himself and Donald, while Donald remains stagnant. And I think this goes back to the rather dubious unofficial endorsements that Trump received from David Duke, and the fact that Donald Jr. went on to or was at least slated to go on or make an appearance on a notorious white supremacist radio show. That sort of thing really starts to take credibility away from Donald's campaign. And then you see the way that Ann Coulter engages in intellectual disingenuousness. She lambasted the mainstream media, saying that they didn't do enough to differentiate between what states were caucuses and what states were primaries. And her argument there was that the primaries tend to go more towards Trump, whereas the caucuses tend to lean more towards the so-called establishment candidate. And I do have to take issue with what Anne was saying there, because basically what she's insinuating is that Ted Cruz, the most vocal anti-establishment candidate, the one who has actually gone to the Senate floor time and again and waged all-out war on the establishment, going so far as to call Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell a liar within the Senate chamber, somehow he's now part of the establishment? Come on, Annie, you have been so divisive throughout this entire election cycle. And for what? You know, little orphan Annie Toto, your little yep, Ted Cruz's establishment, yep. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. You are absolutely prancing towards irrelevance, and you seem to bask in the glory of prancing towards irrelevance. One would think that you would want to save your career. You know, it's interesting to note that prior to the 2016 presidential election cycle starting, you put out your book about, you know, the illegal aliens that are flooding across our porous southern border, and you cite that as one of the main reasons why you've thrown your anorexic weight behind Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, yet you've remained absolutely tight-lipped with respect to his current changing positions. If there's one thing that anyone should notice about Donald Trump, it's that he is consistently inconsistent. And this continues to be the case. Remember, he had tried to hit Ted Cruz on saying that he wouldn't use torture, or that he would only use waterboarding in a select number of cases. Well, now he's reversing his positions on that, and he did that just a day after doubling down on his prior position on that matter during the Detroit GOP debate, which was the 11th nationally televised gutless opposition party debate, to absolutely disavowing that position. And I've heard from some pundits on television and in the radio and then in social media and whatnot that he did this because some of his military advisors came up to him and said, you know, Trumpy, that any order that you'd give that would be an unlawful order, the military is constitutionally bound not to follow. You see, folks, that again just demonstrates the problem that I have with Donald Trump. He doesn't seem to understand the Constitution, and as Jeremy and I have said on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, dating back to our first episode, the Constitution is the key. If you want to find solutions for the problems that are currently facing the United States of America, you don't have to look far to find the answers. The answers have been with us since the start of this country over 230 plus years ago. And that answer is our shared Constitution, because it absolutely outlines and defines and, yes, even mandates the proper scope and application of government. And the reason that we're seeing a lot of problems in this country, including the moral decay that has been plaguing this country, is because we have steadily divorced ourselves from the strict adherence of that sacred document. And I say it's a sacred document because there can be no question that it was absolutely divinely inspired by Providence. There is no other way to explain how a natural law system like that of our republic could exist and have the longest uninterrupted running constitution in all of world history. That's just incredible, folks. It shows the great vision and foresight that our founding fathers had, and the last thing we ought to be doing is throwing that away. But back to this strain of anger that I mentioned from the opening of the program, we see that there really is this divisiveness that is gripping the hearts and minds of a great many Americans. And I understand that anger, but I wish that we could channel it into actually finding workable, practicable solutions that would actually help the country. Because I think the problem is that a lot of people are looking for a savior in a candidate. And that's a dangerous path to walk. These messianic figures are dictatorial in nature, usually. Look at Adolf Hitler during the 20th century. He absolutely presented himself to the German people as a messianic figure who could make Germany great again. You're starting to see the dots are there to be connected, and that's simply what I'm trying to do here. Another figure from the 20th century that was a messianic figure was Benito Mussolini. He said that he would restore Italy to the might and glory of the Roman Empire. So you see, these people would say that they and they alone were the key to solving the country's woes. But you see, that's not the case here. Our founding fathers never intended nor designed our government and our nation to operate in such a fashion. They loathed and despised this notion of centralized authority. For them, sovereignty, by its very nature, must rest in the hands of the American people. And it's as Thomas Paine had said, one of the worst forms, the most evil forms of government that man ever devised was that of monarchy. And when you look at the history of the United States and its development, you'll find that our founding fathers revolutionized the definition of sovereignty. Prior to the inception of the United States of America, sovereignty was normally confined in the presence of a singular entity, usually the king. Now, in England, there was a bit of a process away from that. Sovereignty was defined as the king with the granting approval of Parliament. Well, our founding fathers took it one step further. They were the ones that said, no, it ultimately rests in the hands of the people. This is something that Ted Cruz understands, and I believe that that message is starting to resonate with the electorate, or certainly with a growing portion of the base of the Republican Party. And the reason that I say this is you see that he keeps closing the gap in Donald Trump, and he's now, in certain states, starting to outperform Trump. Just look at the victory in Maine. That was quite something to see, because Maine is certainly not what you would consider a very conservative state, but Ted Cruz absolutely won that contest. And yes, it was still fairly close between he and Donald, but Donald went into this entire Super Saturday contest thinking that he was going to, mop the floor with every other candidate there. But he simply was unable to mop the floor with Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz won Kansas very convincingly, also not known as a very stalwart conservative state, although they are salt-of-the-earth people there in Kansas. It's just that some of their representatives, senators, and whatnot have not been known as stalwarts of conservatism. And then he won Maine as well. And of course, Annie was trying to say that this was just because caucuses go towards the establishment candidate. Well, let's stop and think about that for a moment. If you look back to Super Tuesday, Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus really took off in Nevada. That was a caucus. He took off in Nevada. And then the other thing I have to laugh about what Annie said was that in the one primary state, Trump absolutely killed it. Well, no, he didn't. That was a very, very close race, and the delegate count shows that he took hardly any more delegates than Cruz did. So, literally, everything that Annie was saying about that was framed in a way that just doesn't correspond with reality. And I know that she has trouble with reality every now and then, and that's why I'm reaching out the olive branch again. Oh, no, I just took it away. I was reaching out the olive branch to say, look, Annie, frame this in the proper context and you might have a decent argument. The problem is the way that you're doing it is a Saul Alinsky tactic, a radical left-wing tactic, and that really is unbecoming of you, little orphan Annie Toto. I mean, you should absolutely try and reframe the way you're looking at this to try and keep credibility, but I have a feeling you just don't give a damn anymore. You don't care about your credibility, and that's why you're shooting your credibility by going out and being the most raucous cheerleader for Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. But it really is not connecting with the people who would go out and buy your books. And the same can be said about Sarah Palin. And I think there's another interesting point that we need to look to with respect to what happened in Maine. Maine's governor was one of the first that came out and endorsed the Donald. Absolutely came out and said he was unstoppable and thought that that would absolutely seal the deal, so to say, in Maine for Trump. Well, no, it didn't. It hurt. It hurt them. And I think we're starting to see a pattern that in every state, like Alaska, where former Governor Sarah Palin endorsed Donald Trump also came to defeat. It's an interesting pattern to see, and I'd like to see whether that pattern continues going into New Jersey, because as we all know, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has also endorsed Donald Trump. And I don't think that's going to sit well with the voters of New Jersey. In fact, the one newspaper that had originally endorsed Christie in New Hampshire said that they made a grave mistake in endorsing him after he came out and endorsed someone he said was unequivocally unqualified to be president. So you see that all of a sudden these words and these actions have consequences. And it'll be interesting to see how these consequences flesh out as the race goes on. But there's another important point that we need to take away from all of this, and that is that the establishment, so-called establishment, what I refer to as the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, there is no pathway for them. This absolutely is a movement in the party. And the base of the party has had it with politics as usual. Yet, I think that the notion and the line that all of a sudden Donald Trump would be the answer to that is starting to fade. I think the electorate and certainly the base of the gutless opposition party is starting to recognize that he was the one that absolutely financed the sort of cronyism and the sort of corruption that the people are just absolutely sick and tired of. And that is not something to be taken lightly, because it speaks to the absolute character of the race as it stands right now, and that is working absolutely against what Donald Trump actually is as compared to the type of image that he has been portraying to the base. So one would not be incorrect in saying that the mask is starting to come off of Donald and the voters are not liking what they see. And part of this has to do with his loathsome debate performances. I love how the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media keep trying to say that his poor debate performances haven't had an impact on him. Well, no, I think it absolutely has, when you've seen the manner and method in which the race has been tightening. We see now that it's unequivocally a two-man race. And therefore I will take this opportunity to lean on John Kasich and to Marco Narco Ruby IEIO over there. Drop out of the race now and save face. We need to coalesce behind a constitutional conservative to stop this charlatan, this snake oil salesman that's doing everything in his power to divide this party and ensure that Hillary gets in. Because, as we've all seen from the recent polls, Donald Trump is not going to be capable of stopping Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton beats him, and Noidface Bernie Sanders defeats him in the general election. And do we really want a continuation of the failed policies that we have seen under the two disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime? Because let me say right now, ladies and gentlemen, we would absolutely have a third Barack Hussein Obama term if we elected either a Noidface Bernie Sanders or a Hillary Rotten Clinton, and yes, even a Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. And the area where you can really see that is Trump's continued push for universal health care. He's trying to couch it in a way to make it sound different than what it is, but that's absolutely what he's pushing, particularly with respect to that ludicrous argument that we need to repeal and replace Obamacare. No, we don't. We need to go back to the Constitution. And thus far, folks, again, the only candidate in this race who is a self-avowed constitutionalist is none other than Texas Senator Ted Cruz. But again, I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm just telling you the way I see it. I'm just calling it as I see it, folks. You know, one of the things that I noticed with respect to Fox News and some of the various other salivating mainstream media outlets with respect to calling the races in favor of Ted Cruz and that of Donald Trump, they always tend to call Trump's early. You know, when there's less than even 1% of the vote in, they'll sometimes come out and call it for Trump. But whenever it's for Cruz, they wait until the last minute. They wait until there's just absolutely no possible way to fathom that Trump could miraculously pull out a victory in the race. For example, Kansas. But really, the glaring example with that last night was with Maine. Yet then you look at the results in Louisiana, and they called it when less than 1% of the vote was in. You know, folks, that gives me reason to pause. It speaks to this undeniable media bias against Texas Senator Ted Cruz, and that has been with us from the beginning. The salivating mainstream media has wanted to put an end to his candidacy from the start. They don't like the thought of a true, pure constitutionalist securing the nomination for the gutless opposition party because it means the usual dog and pony show of the heroic Democratic Party and the Fabian Socialists would absolutely come to an end because there'd be somebody challenging them, somebody who's willing to stand up and take their goodies and toys away. Irrespective of the fact that that's exactly what this country needs, particularly after these two disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. But again, this goes back to that thread of intellectual disingenuousness that we have seen on the part of the media, but and also some of the loudest cheerleaders for Donaldus. And in particular, that's Annie Coulter. Ann Coulter's just stance in this entire election has been mind-boggling, and it absolutely explains why she's marching towards irrelevance. You know, we here at the Wright Flyer have absolutely been against the notion of giving blanket amnesty to those illegal aliens who poured through our porous southern border. We make no bones about that. We are not in favor of the illegal aliens. And that's why we also don't support Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus's so-called immigration reform plan. Because when you look at it, it absolutely supports this notion of what is known as touchback amnesty. And people are like, well, if you look at what Cruz is saying, that's a very hardline stance that most Americans don't support. Well, if most Americans don't support enforcing the laws that are already on the book, which says that if you are deported and you attempt to re-enter this country, you're a felon and therefore cannot legally re-enter the country, then have Congress rewrite the law. Congress has chosen not to do it because they absolutely know that when it comes down to it, their constituents absolutely would not support it and there would be risk of a voter revolution. But, you know, that's exactly what we're seeing with respect to the 2016 presidential election cycle thus far. This is absolutely a voter revolution. But I do have to go out on a limb here and say that I disagree with what Rush Limbaugh has said with respect to this. He keeps talking about it being that the base is looking at this as a class warfare type of thing. Yes, there is this class warfare type of thing where the so-called detente wing of the gutless opposition party looks down their noses at the base of the party and is ashamed of the base of the party and is doing everything in their power to divorce themselves and separate themselves from the base of the party. But that said, this notion that just because Cruz is a member of the Senate, that somehow gets him lumped into the establishment, and that's certainly the lie and mischaracterization that Trump and the Trump camp have been pushing, that does not correlate with reality. And I have to say that I'm a little disappointed that Rush has not done more to speak out about that. He'll do it every now and then, but it's more of just saying that he's loving seeing Trump. And there really is kind of a conflict of interest there with respect to Rush and Trump, because he's a longtime personal friend of Trump, and he doesn't want to put that at jeopardy. Well, I, fortunately, do not have a long-term friendship with Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, and I can absolutely say that what he's doing is driving a wedge between the voters, and absolutely making it all that much easier for Hillary Rotten Clinton or a nerd-faced Burn Me Sanders to waltz into the highest office in the land. And that's really a depressing thing to see in this country, particularly when you take into account all of the efforts of the Barack Hussein Obama regime to, quote-unquote, fundamentally transform the country. Folks, what Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus is doing here is actually making it to where the candidate that he gave the most money to when she was a senator from his home state of New York can take the White House. It's more akin to the progressive views that he has espoused for the vast majority of his adult life. And again, this is why I think he is consistently inconsistent when it comes to this race. It's because he absolutely does not believe in what he is espousing here. Now, I know that there will be those who say that if you're claiming that Trump is not a conservative, then you're full of excrement. Well, perhaps so, but, Trump has a track record. He has a history where he's come out to the salivating mainstream media and said different lines. I mean, think back to his appearance on Fox and Friends back in the summer of 2013, when he was absolutely saying that you couldn't deport all of these illegal aliens who are already in the country. Now, all of a sudden, that's a different position. And he basically changed position overnight. And I'm sorry, I find that very hard to believe. I find it very hard to believe that all of a sudden he would have this major shift in his heart, this come to Jesus moment where all of a sudden he wants to kick Jesus out. It doesn't fit. Because when you look at somebody who has as strongly held of a position as he did coming up to the point where he officially threw his hat in the ring to run for the gutless opposition party nomination, you don't flip on it unless, if you look at the art of the deal, the whole idea is you take the most extreme, hardline bargaining position and then you whittle your way back from it. And that shows why he's consistently inconsistent. And again, it goes to this line where he said that everything's up for negotiation. But that's the thing, folks. When you stop and think that over these past 2 terms under the Barack Hussein Obama regime, our fundamental and unalienable rights have come under a deliberate and incessant attack. Whether it be our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to be, protected from unreasonable searches and seizures, what have you, that has all come under attack. And the whole thing that I have with respect to Trump on this is Trump has repeatedly said that everything is negotiable. Everything is up for negotiation. No, our fundamental and unalienable rights are not up for negotiation. They've never been up for negotiation. They are non-negotiable. And you see, that's the problem. Trump is approaching this as running a business, but the United States of America is not a business, never will be a business, because it's something more. It's something more. It's something that is based off of the natural law tenets, which by their very nature are timeless. And that's why I don't like it when he constantly and continuously comes out here and says that everything is negotiable. Everything's up for negotiation. No, it's not. In fact, if you look at our legal system, the right to life is not negotiable. That's why it says that you cannot waive your right to live. That's why there's been all of these heated court cases and court battles over physician-assisted suicide, things of that nature. You cannot waive that right. Now, you can be adjudicated by a jury of your peers to have lost the right to live by infringing upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of your fellow citizens, but that is absolutely part of due process under the law. That is what the Constitution requires. And so you see, that means that it's non-negotiable. And I don't think that Donald Trump really grasps that, really has a true understanding with respect to that. And I think that that too partially plays into why we're starting to see his momentum absolutely slow down. He is losing momentum because the race is absolutely tightening. Ted Cruz is virtually tied with him in the states where Cruz lost last night, which was half of them. And then where he's winning, he's absolutely outperforming him. That's why Ted Cruz took home more delegates from the Super Saturday contest than Trump did. And so you know already that the spin doctors at the Trump camp are going to try and spin this as, well, I still have won more states. Okay, you still have won more states. But you got to remember that when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters here is the number of delegates you had. And in that key respect, Donald Trump lost last night. He absolutely lost last night. He did not take away as many delegates as Cruz. Now, yes, he still has an overall lead, but I expect that that will narrow. And particularly when some of the stragglers start dropping out of the race, and when all of the anti-Trump vote coalesces behind the principled conservative from the state of Texas. That is when you're going to see a drastic shift. And that is when you're going to see Trump's campaign start to implode. But of course, the pundits don't want to think that. That's the worst nightmare for the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. They've done everything in their power to try and make Cruz an unviable candidate. They've tried to say he's unelectable. They tried to say that he wouldn't be able to go as far as he has. They said that if you just look at the polls, he wouldn't be able to outmaneuver Trump or to outdo Trump. Yet, all of a sudden, we see that he is. And it also explains why neither Jeremy or myself put much weight or credence into polls, usually. It's because time and again, if you look back at the 2004 presidential campaign, the exit polls said that that was a shoo-in for Kerry, and Kerry lost. If you looked at some of the polls going into the midterm elections of November 2014, I'm thinking particularly of Eric Cantor's defeat by Representative Bratt there. The polls said that Cantor should have been a shoo-in. Well, he wasn't. You see, there is this pattern here where the media is going to try and construe the story in such a way as to debilitate and demoralize the base of the true conservatives. And why do they do that? It's because at their heart and soul, they are absolutely diametrically opposed to the notion of a real constitutional conservative getting in there and starting to set this country back on course. They want to continue to drink from the gravy train. They want to continue to push the Fabian socialist hard line. And I'm going to lump Fox News into that because of the deplorable things that I saw during the coverage of last night's contest. They kept saying that it's very early in Maine and that Trump could still win it. Trump could still win it. Trump could still win it. And they kept dragging it out until finally, the gutless opposition party itself came out and said, Cruz wins Maine. And all of a sudden they tried to go into backpedal mode. They tried to do damage control. They tried to say, well, this is still inevitable for Trump, but maybe it also means that it's inevitable for a brokered convention. And yes, it is possible that none of the candidates will get the votes necessary to bring in a clincher for the nomination, but if it goes to a brokered convention, that will absolutely be the death of the gutless opposition party. This is where I can agree with Rush. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that that's probably the goal of Donald Trump. You see the way that he just viciously attacks his opponent, his opponents on the stage within his own party, yet he's reserved attacks and held punches with Madam Clinton and Lloyd Face Boy Me Sanders. And I think that the reason for that is he is more ideologically akin to them. That he's not really doing this to fight them. I mean, folks, we can't forget that he had Hillary Clinton to his own wedding. I mean, does that sound like someone that you're politically opposed to diametrically, and you say that we've got to make the country great again? No. We need somebody who's actually principled here. We need somebody who is actually willing to stand up to the Fabian socialists and say without any question, without any hesitation, that our fundamental and unalienable rights are non-negotiable. But Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus has already proven that he's absolutely not going to do that. Because he's already repeatedly said that everything is negotiable. And we see that. He's softening his position on immigration. He softened his so-called hardline stance on terrorism. And if you look at what he was doing with the so-called art of the deal, that's absolutely what he was doing. He's seeing it as it's now going to be a position where I'm going to negotiate with the electorate. Well, no. You're not going to negotiate with me. And you're not going to negotiate, I have a feeling, with the majority of our cherished listening passengers and audience here, because we absolutely understand that our fundamental and unalienable rights are endowed to us by our Creator, and that they are non-negotiable. That was the position that George Mason took when he was called upon to assist drafting the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia that became the focal point and the absolute inspiration for the Bill of Rights. And so when you take all of this into consideration, in totality, you see that Donald J. Trump is not the strong candidate that he likes to paint himself out as being. And I absolutely believe that that's why the recent polling that's come out with respect to a head-on-head battle between Trumpus and Madam Clinton and Trumpus and Lloyd Face Boy Me Sanders, he loses. Whereas a head-on-head between Clinton and Cruz wins. And I also have a feeling that it would be that Cruz would mop the floor with Nerdface Burn Me Sanders. I do not believe that the United States of America is ready to have a self-avowed socialist as their president. We never should, because as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, has stated on past episodes of The Wright Flyer, when you take into consideration that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, then you absolutely realize that socialism is incompatible with the United States. It's an illegal position to take. It is not something that we should ever allow to come to fruition in the United States. And that's why I don't think we would see a Nerdface Burn Me Sanders become our next president. Unless the Republican Party sells its soul and allows Donald Trump to become its nominee. Now, if you want to vote for him, that's fantastic. Go ahead and vote your heart out for him. Just know that you will be part and parcel responsible for any and all of the negative things that befall this country. I mean, that's part of what always comes with exercising our fundamental and unalienable rights, and that includes the fundamental and unalienable right to vote. We have to also accept the consequences and responsibility for the decisions we make. But I'm not going to tell you how to exercise your rights, just as you cannot tell me how to exercise my rights. But we absolutely have to accept the responsibility for exercising our rights. And that's something that Jeremy and I do each and every time we come up to these microphones and speak to you. We are taking on responsibility for the message that we're conveying. And the message that we're conveying is absolutely one in which we say that you, the American people, are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty. And if you stop and think about that for a moment, folks, that's absolutely telling you that you are powerful. You're absolutely powerful. You are the most powerful political force in these United States. And isn't that a breath of fresh air to be empowered? Isn't it a breath of fresh air to be said that the responsibility that comes to saving this country does not belong to a singular entity or individual, that it belongs to each and every one of us as our role as citizens, in our capacity as popular sovereigns of this great representative republic of ours? You know, you're not going to hear that from Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. You're not going to hear that from little orphan Annie Yep Yep Toto. You're not going to hear that from Narco Ruby IEIO, and you're not going to hear that from John Kasich, who I don't even know why he's still in this race. You remember in New Hampshire, he came out and said that he should have polled as a Democrat. Well, you know what, Johnny Kasich boy? I mean, I know that your father's a mailman, and he's probably slow at getting this letter to you, but that sort of statement is not going to win you any accolades with the base, particularly in this contentious and venomous atmosphere that we're in right now. It is just going to lead you to not perform. And guess what, Kasich? You're not performing. You didn't do well last night. You haven't even won a single state yet. You are just dividing the vote. It is time for you to step out. Keep your dignity, step out. And then maybe I'll think something of you. But that's going to be very difficult because you've already shown time and again from your own past career to not assume the sorts of positions that I value. That your outlook for this country is far different than mine, and that you are willing to infringe upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of the people. Think back to his tenure in the 1990s in Congress when he helped push the assault weapons ban. You know, that was proven not to be successful, and that is not a conservative position. But then again, John Kasich is not a conservative, just as Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus is not a conservative. These are the realities that we must accept. What I'm speaking of here is just the facts. When you look at this, the facts are there is only one candidate who is still vying for the nomination, who absolutely is a principled constitutionalist and has been a principled constitutionalist for his entire adult life. In fact, he started when he was in middle school, when he memorized the Constitution. That is quite an admirable feat. And then with all of the times that he has stood in front of the Supreme Court and absolutely fought for and won when defending our fundamental and unalienable rights, that speaks volumes about the character of the man. It speaks volumes about his qualifications to be our next president. And I absolutely think that we would be better off as a nation if he were to be our next president. But I can't make that decision for you, folks. You have to make that decision. I can make the decision for myself, and I have. I've cast my vote, and my state went for Cruz. And that's because we absolutely knew and know that Cruz has stood up for us each and every time that he went onto the Senate floor, that he has reached out to the American people, explained his positions to them, and even when there were things that maybe I disagreed with, after he went and explained it, I saw the reasoning and the logic behind it, and it absolutely made sense. And so I am not telling you how to vote, I'm just explaining the reasons why I voted the way that I did, and I encourage you, should you find that you agree with this, to also cast your vote in that way, should that line up with your values and your convictions. But ultimately, it's going to come down to you have to research this yourself. I provide you with some of this information and some of this logic as a way to look into it. But the only litmus test that matters here, the only measuring stick that matters when determining whether or not a candidate is qualified to hold the highest office in the land, is that of our shared United States Constitution. It ultimately comes down to whether that candidate is operating in line with the Constitution. And if they aren't, then that should disqualify that candidate. Because, if you recall, the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. There is no way around that. It is absolutely a quintessential part of how our representative republic is designed. And our founding fathers really did have the great foresight to realize that the people needed to have the ability to be the arbiters of the destiny of the country. It is our duty and our responsibility to save the country and to prevent charlatans, snake oil salesmen, and con artists from getting into the office of president. Politicians are always a type that will go against the people, because the people are going to resist having their money taken away, their rights taken away, their prestige taken away in order to empower the politician. But there's something that needs to be noted about this. One of the things that I've heard repeated time and again is that Donald Trump is not a politician. Really? Stop and think about it. Business is politics. Law is politics. And the way that law and business intersect is absolutely politics. Trump has been greasing the palms of politicians for generations. And yes, he absolutely became a die-in-the-wool politician when he threw his hat in the ring. But he's been a politician by the very fact that he's been financing certain political views. And those certain political views that he's given the most to are absolutely diametrically opposed to our constitutional system of government. And I think that that should speak volumes about whether or not this man is qualified to be our next president. Because in my mind, it ultimately disqualifies him. Because he has supported efforts, including the Gang of Eight, to subvert the Constitution, to act against the Constitution and the consent and will of the people. But he speaks a very good game. He is a charismatic figure, and his bombastic, abrasive style has struck a chord with the voters. I'm not going to deny that. He absolutely has struck a chord with the voters, and they're tired of this cancerous and poisonous doctrine of political correctness that has made us weak and tepid in the long run. And that absolutely is something that resonates with the voters, because they're sick and tired of seeing the country approach this, the edge of abyss and ruin, to be plunged over that cliff to our ultimate annihilation. Yes, we're all sick and tired of that. We don't want to see that happen to our country. And unfortunately, that's just been what the status quo is. But it's important that we actually look to see who the candidate is that is vying for that office. It is our duty and our responsibility to vet those candidates, and technically the media is supposed to assist us with that. But as we've seen, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have had an undeniable bias from the beginning. They are die-in-the-wool Fabian socialists, for the most part, because that's the way the schools of journalism throughout this country are teaching. They're indoctrinating them to think that this socialist agenda, this socialist message, is something that's important to push the country forward, to advance their goals and their ideology. But literally, no, that does not coincide with or line up with the way that our founding fathers intended for this country to be. And it's not the way that our timeless natural law principles would work. But that doesn't matter to them. And that's the danger that we have with the revisionist historians and the Fabian socialists that have crept into the halls of education throughout this country. And it's fascinating to see, like with Zygmunt Dobbs and his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard, that this has been with us for well over half a century. Indeed, they have been working tirelessly towards this goal for well over a century. And that also speaks volumes about the sorts of problems that we are encountering in this country. Our culture is under assault. There is no other way to put it. And Donald Trump, for the vast majority of his adult life, has been on the wrong side of that. And now just suddenly he's changed his opinion. I think people are starting to wake up to the reality of who he is. He is a fascist. He's already expressed having and holding an affinity for Benito Mussolini. His ex-wife Ivana said back in the 90s that he kept a book of Hitler's speeches next to his bed. Again, folks, I think this speaks volumes about the character of the man and to how he would approach our shared constitution. And I think he would be diametrically opposed to it because of the positions he's already assumed, because of the type of people like David Duke that have endorsed him, and the way that the media has sort of coalesced behind him, and the company that he kept. Hillary Clinton. We mustn't forget that his sister was appointed to the courts by Bill Clinton, and that he had Hillary Clinton to his wedding, and that he had an amicable relationship with the Clintons. Well, I think that speaks volumes, folks. And for me, it disqualifies him from being the president. But ultimately, for you, that decision rests with you. I'm just providing you with this information with the hopes that it empowers you and gives you a moment of pause to look into this a little bit further for yourself. Folks, this leads me to the next point that I have, and that's with respect to the John Kasichs and the narco-rube EIEIOs who are just hopelessly staying into this race, claiming that they have a path to victory when all of the evidence shows that that's clearly not the case. And what does that come down to? It comes down to a type of delusion of grandeur. One of the things that Cruz mentioned in his victory speech in Kansas was that, yes, these people all want to see themselves as the candidate that's going to be the one that ushers in a new era for the United States, where the people are empowered to act for themselves and to really bring this country back from the brink of ruin. But the fact of the matter is, Kasich hasn't won a single state. His position has not resonated with the American people, and this is part and parcel due to the fact that he is part of the problem. He is absolutely a die-in-the-wool member of the so-called establishment wing of the gutless opposition party. He is a détente candidate, but even the détente wing of the gutless opposition party does not look upon him as a viable candidate who is going to be able to take the party to victory in the general election. They had originally placed that hope on El Jefe Jeb Bush, but the former Florida governor, his campaign never took off. Absolutely never took off. And that was part of the interesting dynamic with the early part of this 2016 presidential election cycle, in so much as when you looked at the way that was playing out, it clearly was Jeb vying for a lower tier position, the way that his campaign launched attack after attack on narco-rube EIEIO. And part of that had to do with this anger that Bush felt towards narco for not stepping aside and waiting his turn. You see, the Bush camp was absolutely about you wait your turn. That was something that George H.W. Bush had done. That was what the GOP had attempted to establish with this type of primary system and schedule that we have now. The whole purpose was to prevent these long, drawn-out contests like what we're seeing right now, but it didn't play out the way that they wanted because of the dark horse candidate of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. So if there is one thing that I can thank Trump for, it's for disrupting the process. But now he's outlived that usefulness. He has allowed his ego which is a substantial thing, or substantive thing, to overtake him, to absolutely take control of him, and he now thinks that he can become the king. That's literally the way that he is looking at this now. He's even referred to it as a reign. That was something that Senator Ben Sasse had mentioned in his open letter to Trump supporters, stating why he could never, ever vote for Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus in the general election. And that is a sentiment that is shared by many pure constitutionalists. Now, one of the things that they said is that Cruz had no support or endorsements from his fellow senators. But I had heard on social media, so keep in mind, folks, this may not be accurate, but in the Kentucky caucus, that Rand Paul had voted for Ted Cruz. If that's not an endorsement, then I don't know what is. And it would make sense because their positions with respect to the Constitution literally do tend to line up. And the reason they line up is because they share this view that our shared Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And that is the quintessential message that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have tried to reiterate time and again here on the Wright Flyer, because it really is that important. I do believe that the Constitution is the key to allowing the popular sovereigns to correct the problems that face this country. I do believe that the problems that we see now are reversible, that we can be the robust and powerful nation that our founding fathers had always intended for us to be. But the first step towards accomplishing that is to recognize that the Constitution is the solution. And so far, the vast majority of the candidates that we have seen vying for the highest office in the land, or at least for the nomination for the chance to go at that office, don't espouse that. Certainly, Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus has not espoused that, and John the Mushroom Kasich hasn't. And so I'm wondering if Kasich is still waiting for the package from his father that's going to tell him that, hey, look, this just isn't your time, Johnny. Your time would have been 30 years ago. Time has surpassed you, and we are in a new era in this country, and there absolutely is this movement brewing within the base of the GOP, because they're sick and tired of politics as usual. The status quo has gotten us into the sort of problems that we have now, and that's absolutely a direct consequence of the type of capitulation and the type of collaboration that we've seen on the part of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party and the Barack Hussein Obama regime and the Democrats. Just think back to the start of this year when Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, who had basically set up his whole shtick as being that he could help get a balanced budget going, when he handed that omnibus bill to Barack Hussein Obama, giving him everything. And there's no question that Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan is for open borders and giving blanket amnesty to that torrent of illegal aliens who seep through our porous southern border. That is a major problem. When we have that wing of the party sitting there saying that it goes against American values to say that those who broke our laws should be held accountable for breaking our laws, I got a problem with that. Because, again, it shows that they are divorcing themselves quite purposefully from the absolute notion that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. Well, why is that? Well, it's because they see on the Republican side a source of absolute cheap labor, and I'm going to throw Kasich in on this too, because you remember he said we can't break up families, yada, 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 all of that, and how we just have to give them a path to legalization, even though that's violative of our well-established law. They embrace this because they see cheap labor, and that satisfies their friends in the chambers, or in the Chamber of Commerce. And for the Democrats, they see it as a permanent underclass that will always vote for the Democrats because they are the ones that promote the entitlement mentality that currently grips this country. But if we are going to absolutely begin to restore prosperity here in the United States of America, the way we've got to do that is to realize that our laws have meaning, value, and importance, and that we are a nation of laws. And that means that we have to stop with the touchy-feely, politically correct, emotional arguments that are being ushered out and believe it or not. Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus has been touting that kind of line too, with saying, well, we want the best and brightest of those that came into this country illegally to come back in. No, we don't. We want to empower the American worker and the American citizen to have their chance to bask in this representative republic of ours. And what the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, and yes, even Trump in his hiring policies at some of his Florida hotel properties, absolutely goes against that. And then they come up with this litany of excuses, which doesn't hold any water, folks. It doesn't convince me, and I don't think that it convinces a vast majority of the American citizenry and electorate. Because when you're sitting there saying that these are jobs that Americans wouldn't do, where do they come up with this? Who are they going out and asking? They certainly didn't ask me. They didn't ask any of my family or my friends. No. I know that Americans are definitely the hardest working people on the face of the planet. We're the most compassionate people as well. But that is being tested with the way that the political elites, those so-called political powers that be, take positions that are diametrically opposed to the benefit and well-being of the popular sovereigns in this country. And that is completely upside down and backwards from the way that our founding fathers intended for this country to run. But that doesn't seem to cross their mind, and they don't really seem to care about that, because for them, it's all about this cushy position that they have gained for themselves, and that has placed them in a position where they are diametrically opposed to the benefit and well-being of their constituents. And again, that is completely problematic. But folks, the only way we're going to see that trend reverse itself, and the only way that we're going to see this country start to really go back towards the foundational inspiration that our founding fathers had with respect to this country, is to go back to the Constitution itself. The Constitution, as Jeremy and I have said countless numbers of times on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, is the key. It is the solution. It is what will make America go back to the path of being robust. And, it's part of what our duties are as American citizens. It's part of that conversation that doesn't get any coverage from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And that is this, that with our fundamental and unalienable rights, there is always couched a duty, responsibility, and obligation. And the most important one is that we proactively maintain and safeguard those fundamental and unalienable rights. And that means that you have to educate yourself when making a decision as to whom you believe is best qualified to vie for the highest office in the land. It's absolutely your duty and responsibility to make sure that you are making educated decisions with respect to the candidates. And I don't speak of this from some elitist position. This is something that anyone and everyone can do, particularly today, with the way that the internet and social media works and our smartphones. We are connected to the greatest library that has ever been at the disposal of mankind. Information is just a click or thumb swipe away. And that is just incredible, because it means that you can find voluminous amounts of information about the respective candidates, and you can make these educated determinations. It has nothing to do with degrees. It has nothing to do with your station in life. And it has absolutely everything to do with your commitment to this great contract that we have, this great social contract that is the greatest social compact ever devised by the hands of man, yet inspired by Providence itself, and that's our Constitution. And again, this is why I say it is so important to apply a constitutional lens to determining whether or not a candidate is qualified to be our next president. It's because that is the only thing of substance and matter and importance that really does count, because it is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution touches, applies, and affects each and every one of us as popular sovereigns. And it is our duty and obligation, and also our responsibility, to understand that that power rests within us. And stop and think about that for a moment, folks. You have a lot more power than what the media gives you credit for, than what Donald Trump gives you credit for, and in many cases, what you yourself give yourself credit for. If there is one thing that Jeremy and I could accomplish with these shows that would be the greatest achievement that we could accomplish, it would be to allow even just one voter or one popular sovereign to recognize just how great their power and authority actually is. Because that will plant the seed to bring this country back from the brinks of ruin. That will be the absolute start to the resistance against the onslaught against our values and traditions that have been established by the Fabian socialists like Barack Hussein Obama, like Madam Clinton, and yes, like Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, so that we can come together without any question, without any reserve, without any hesitation, and say to the government when it's attempting to encroach upon our fundamental and inalienable rights that no, you do not get to have your way with us. No, our rights are non-negotiable. You will not negotiate it away, because if you give them an inch, they will take a mile. And folks, history is the great teacher that shows us that this happens time and again. That's what the progressives are all about. It's about this incremental march of socialism, this incrementally taking away your rights. They think they know what's best. And it's why Alexander de Tocqueville said that socialists absolutely are New Age feudalists, because they want to micromanage every facet of our daily lives. And if you look at some of the things that Donald Trump has said, that the government has to take care of healthcare, no, what that really boils down to being, and what that absolutely means, is that they want control. He wants the government to have control over healthcare. Again, it's this mentality that he has of centralizing authority, having one singular entity be able to tell you how to do things. And again, this is reinforced with the position that he's taken with respect to the federal ownership of lands in our westernmost states. You know, the very type of fight that we saw with the Bundys, and then that we saw play out in Oregon, you know, at the first part of this year and at the closing chapters of 2015. And when you stop and consider that the federal government owns 90% of the land there, what that should mean is that it belongs to all of us as popular sovereigns. But the Bureau of Land Management and Malarkey does not view it that way. They view it as the federal government having rights. But folks, when you look at the natural law framework that underpins this entire representative Republican system of government we have, the only ones who have rights are we the people. Militias don't have rights. That's why the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. And then when you recall that the framework of the entire Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, is the Bill of Rights, meaning it's specifically speaking to the rights of the people, the only ones who can have rights because we are the true sovereigns. It doesn't make sense to say that it was just meaning a militia. Militias don't have rights. States do not have rights. The only way that a state could have quote-unquote rights is in a representative capacity, in that they are a representative entity of the people. But again, that speaks directly to the rights of the people. Now, that was understood in the 19th century when that line was repeated time and again, but it's been misconstrued in modern parlance. And the reason that it has been is that these historical revisionists are working to make people think that no, it's not the individual rights that count. They want to move us away from an undeniable representative Republican form of government to a direct democracy, which means that only the rights of the majority are recognized. Now, our founding fathers were diametrically opposed to such a system because they inherently recognized the rights and the influence of the individual sovereign. That's not what the Democrat Party pushes for. That's not what the Fabian socialist movement pushes for. They absolutely push for absolute total control via a majority giving that control to an oligarchy. Basically, this small group that wields power. And look at the way that they do their delegate counts. They have this thing called a superdelegate. What is that? That's a party boss who can then reverse the say of the people and thereby choose the Democrat Party's nominee over the objections of the people. That, too, is inherently and diametrically opposed to the way that our founding fathers intended for this country to operate. And I think that also speaks volumes about the way that they view governance. Again, it's that they inherently distrust the people. They believe that they and their little clique up there, their coffee clutch up there, is who is basically empowered to make these all-important, overarching decisions for the party and for the country at large. And of course, that just does not coincide with who we are as a nation and who we are as a people. And we should absolutely state that, no, we're not going to accept that, and we're not going to embrace that kind of system because that devalues who we are as popular sovereigns. So you see, folks, again, it comes back to this very notion that popular sovereignty and power rests with us as the ones that have been endowed by our Creator with our fundamental and unalienable rights. That is the intrinsic and inherent part of our Constitution and our country and our system of government that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, the historical revisionists, the Democrats, the Fabian socialists, and yes, even the detente wing of the gutless opposition party don't want you to think about, don't want you to consider, because that poses a direct challenge to their grip on authority. And they are going to do whatever they think is necessary and whatever they can do within their power to further constrain us, to further hold us back, because that compels them to have more power. That expands their power, their control. And when you look at it in this framework, which is absolutely applying a constitutional lens to it, you have to ask yourself, who is the candidate that is absolutely saying that we need to return to the Constitution, that we need to restore the power to the people, and that power absolutely and correctly rests in the hands of the people? Well, folks, there's only one candidate that has assumed such a position, that has advocated such a position, not just now that he's running for the highest office in the land, but ever since he graduated from high school and then later in college and then law school and then went on as the Solicitor General for the state of Texas to defend it in front of the Supreme Court. The only one who's done that is Ted Cruz. And that means that he is absolutely qualified to be our next president. But again, folks, that ultimate determination and decision can only be made by you, the popular sovereigns. I can't tell you how to vote, nor do I desire to tell you how to vote. I am just making the case for what I believe is right, for what my own training has shown, and hope that you see things along this constitutional light as well, and are willing to join me in the fight to correct the problems that face this country. Because it absolutely is going to have to be a proactive initiative on the part of the popular sovereigns, on the part of we the people, because we are the ones that make these determinations. We are the ones that will and are capable of saving this country. It's not going to be one of the candidates, because our very system of government is designed to disallow that from happening, because that is how you start down into the steady downward spiral towards socialism and towards totalitarianism and towards despotism. And remember, folks, that the one thing that our founding fathers all agreed upon was this idea that we should not centralize authority. Well, most of the founding fathers did. Certainly Alexander Hamilton did not. But certainly those that were the ones that framed the Constitution, they did not believe in consolidating or centralizing power in the hands of an elite group or in the hands of a singular entity or branch of government. Because if you recall, the entire fight of the American War of Independence centered around a fight against a centralized crown and the centralized authority of the British Parliament. And they absolutely believed that true power, true sovereignty, rested in the hands of the people. That was such a unique position for that time. And it has proved to be the most open and honest and stable form of government that has been devised in modernity. Our Constitution is the longest contiguous running constitutional document in all of world history. And that is not some small feat. Because we have gone through challenge after challenge. In fact, we've faced, as a nation, greater challenges than the challenges that currently face us today. And we've overcome it. We've always overcome it. But the reason and the method in which we were able to overcome it was that we understood who we were as a nation and as a people. And we worked together towards that greater good. But the Fabian socialists have been working tirelessly to erase that mindset and that outlook from the American people. They have been trying to make us loathe and despise who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, in order to completely rewrite who we are and what we represent. But that is not the truth. That is the obfuscation of the truth that they're attempting to do. And we've seen it time and again with this Barack Hussein Obama regime throughout his disastrous 2 terms in office. And it has worked just absolutely against us. It has pitted American against American as he embraces this notion of divide and conquer. And if you look at what is happening in this 2016 presidential election cycle thus far, that's what Donald Trump and to a lesser extent John Kasich and Narco Rube EIEIO are trying to do. In fact, one of the things that Mitt Romney was trying to do when he did that unprecedented thing, coming out and having that speech before the last debate, where he was throwing mud at Donald Trump, once again prolonging this notion that this entire election cycle has been nothing short of a poorly scripted soap opera, was that he was trying to say, look, you can't have it go just to the people. You can't have a united view. We have to divide it. So some of you vote for Rubio, some of you vote for Kasich. Just make sure that Trump can't get the nomination. Now, while I would hate to see the consequences for what would happen to this country if Donald Trump were to become the nominee, I absolutely have to disagree with the approach that Romney was trying to take there. It needs to be coalescing behind a constitutional conservative. But Romney doesn't want that, because Romney's part of this whole oligarchical system that is diametrically opposed to popular sovereignty. And what's interesting is that the voters of Trump and the voters of Cruz understand this. The difference is the voters for Trump, for some reason, are drawn to this magnetism on his part of the authoritarian. They like this idea that he could tell them what to do and how to do it, and they like that. They like his rough, abrasive style. And I think what that is an absolute response to the sort of cancerous doctrine of political correctness that we've seen plaguing this country for far too long now. And that has literally pushed people to the brink of anger, pushed people to the brink of revolution, in a sense. And that goes back to the piece that Pat Cadell put out back in December of 2015, in which he said that America's very close to a revolution. We're seeing kind of the first steps of it. And a lot of what it is that the American people are starting to feel that there's no hope. That all hope is lost because all candidates and all politicians have lied to them, have made these verbose and grandiose promises, and then have gone up into Washington, D.C. and have been metamorphosized by the miasma that just surrounds that marbled city, and that they are intoxicated with the type of power and backroom dealings that occur all throughout that city, that it draws them away from the people. Which again just clearly demonstrates how far we have departed as a nation from the foundational image and structure that our founding fathers gave to us through the Constitution. Because when you stop and think about it, the Constitution is the greatest birthright of any people on earth. And it is our duty and obligation to not just hand this down to the next generation, but to expand the power of it, to make sure that it has a greater impact on the up-and-coming generations and those generations that have yet to be born. Because we want it to expand. It is that type of image. So let's do our part to make sure that happens. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave questions, comments, or concerns either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationEX. That's all one word, folks, @RadioAviationEX. Again, that's @RadioAviationEX. And also, we have a Cafe Press site set up, folks. We got a shop with our logos. Show your support for us. You can go to Cafe Press and type in Wright Flyer Radio. It'll just, at this point, show one shirt, but if you click on the shirt, the various other products that are available will show up, and that includes drinking mugs, drinking glasses, what have you, and just go ahead and give us a shout out and support us. It looks good, and it'll let people know that you are an enlightened passenger of the Wright Flyer. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We hope to see you next time. Do take care.